Who are your mum and dad? Or who are your mum and dad? Are they still alive?
My father is he's 92.
Wow.
He was 92 this year. Yeah.
Right. And where were you born, actually?
I was born in Leipzig, which is in Saxony, so
Right.
former East Germany.
Right. Can you tell me a bit about your mother and father?
Yeah, they were both from Leipzig, and my father was a doctor.
Right.
He for most of his life he was head of a clinic in East Germany in Leipzig, and they also met. They met at the hospital. My mother and my father. That's where they got to know each other. She was a secretary.
So father was born in 1930?
1930. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. What was his war like in the Second World War? Did you have evacuation in Germany? As we did in Britain?
Yes, yeah, but as far as I know, and my parents told me, he lived in Leipzig, and he was. What I remember was that he was at the age of 14 or 15, and at the end of the war, he was kind of drafted.
Yes, he did.
They were supposed to defend Leipzig against the approaching American troops, and he was very lucky. He got away because they had a senior soldier who was a older soldier, and he just told them to drop their weapons. They had these Panzerfaust or whatever, and were supposed to fight the tanks, the American tanks.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, drop it and go home." And that's what saved him, really.
Oh, wonderful, yeah. And what was life like for them immediately after the war, mother and father?
Yeah, probably quite tough. I mean, all I know is lots of bits and stories. So my mother was a bit older. She was born in 1924. So she was a young woman. Yeah. And obviously Leipzig, the first, the Americans, they liberated Leipzig.
Right, okay.
Which was not too bad because the American soldiers, they had all the supplies they needed. And they were actually quite helpful. So I know that my mother used to tell us that she then helped an American officer she did his laundry, and in exchange they got cigarettes or something, things you could trade then. And but then soon after the Russians came, and which made a huge difference.
Right.
And then
so Leipzig ended up in the German, Russian zone. Yeah. If I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, they divided Germany into 4 zones.
Yes, that's
so
right.
The American, British and French, and then the Russian zone. And then they did the same to Berlin, was divided in the same way. So how far were you into the Russian zone? Did that probably made no difference, but...
No. Basically, in the middle, Leipzig is so Saxony was this is the south part of East Germany, and pretty much in the middle of it.
Right. Did they tell you much about what life was like under the Russians at that time?
Yeah, it was obviously quite tough. I mean, also the Russians. They would take things rather than provide food or supplies for the people there. They didn't have anything themselves, so they would take whatever they could. There was one story. My mother was still living with her grandparents, and they lived in a big flat in the center of Leipzig. And when the Russians came, some Russian officers came, and they looked at the house and the flat and said, "Okay, we want this house. This will be our headquarters."
Right.
And then the people there, they when they realized, they removed all the furniture and even the curtains and everything, and brought it to their neighbors to another house. And when the Russians came back, they saw it was an empty house, and then they said, "No, we're not using this one then anymore." So that's how they got spared. Yeah, so it must have been quite difficult. And
your mum then would be 1924, so 18, 42. She's into her early 20s. Was she already training as a nurse at that point, or?
No, she wasn't a nurse. She was a secretary. She did, but she had done some training, and then I don't know exactly, but she got a job at a hospital. And
was it easy for your father to get an education? How did that work out?
Yeah, I think it was then he was like my grandparents on my father's side. They were both teachers, and they wanted all their children. They had 4 children. My father had 3 siblings, and they wanted all of them to become musicians. And my father was the only one who refused. He had got this in his head. He said, "No, I want to study medicine," and he dropped his violin, and then. And I think he was very good at school. He finished school. He had very good results.
Yes.
And then he got a place at university and was able to study medicine.
Yes. Can I take you just back to your grandparents? Because I think you said to me that your mother's father, I think it was a grandfather, was in the First World War.
Yeah.
How was the First World War commemorated in East Germany?
Like in East Germany, the German past was seen as not on the right path at all, and something that was wrong and bad altogether. And I don't remember any events. All I remember is at school we were told this is was completely. Germany started its First World War as well, and it was the Kaiser. It was all wrong, and we've overcome this, and this is all bad past of our not so good past, and we won't.
We'll go there again.
Go back there and think, and then also but because then East Germany being under Russian. Control, there was at the end of the First World War, Russia basically lost, so the Germans did something similar to the Versailles Treaty to the Russians. They had the Brest-Litovsk Treaty where they treated the Russians really badly, and I don't think that the Russians wanted to go back there and remember this. There were some monuments, but you would never, no one would tell you what was the First World War.
No, after Brest-Litovsk was in the if I remember right, March of 1918, and they took huge swathes of Germany. The Germans took huge swathes of Russia, which is, I think, probably including Ukraine, as we can see nowadays, and the area to the north of there. So the Russians obviously had a bitter memory of that. What was life like for you in East Germany? What was your childhood like?
I think I had a good childhood. It's always, as a child, you don't think so much about what's going on. You focus on your family and had friends, and we went on holidays, and it was actually.
So it was just like it felt like normal life to you.
Certain things were kind of strange, and also my family, we always had contact we had family. Relations in the West, even also in England. My mother's sister became an au pair in the 1950s and went to England and married an Englishman. So we had, therefore, we kind of knew that there was something else and kind of a different world outside our bubble in East Germany, which was always there, or in the back of my head. So I knew that something, there must be a different world, but as a child you don't think so much about politics or
I suppose there was a point in time when Stalin had died in 1953 when things might have been that bit easier perhaps, and then it heated up again towards the end of the 50s and as we get into the 60s.
And it was before 1961 when the wall came up.
Right, exactly.
When they closed the border.
So that was again before your time. So 1961 was with the Berlin Wall. Did you go to Berlin at all?
Oh yes, I remember. Especially when later when I was a teenager, I made quite a few trips. My older brother used to live in Berlin, so I went to see him, and I remember the wall there, and then you were not allowed to go near it from the east side. There was they would stop you, and even on the way to, I remember going on a train to Berlin, police would come through and check your identity and ask you, where are you going and what you want to do there. So there was quite lots of observation by the authorities and police.
What was your impression of the wall? Could you see the wall? Did you see the wall? What was it like?
From the east side, it was basically like, from the east side it looked like looking at a prison, because it was so heavily guarded, but then you could also kind of look over to the west and you would see that there wasn't a prison. There were like
big buildings,
and lots of cars and colorful streets. And compared to the east, which East Berlin wasn't quite as bad as some other places in other parts, because they obviously try to make it look nice and something comparable to the West.
Right.
But so it was like a prison wall, but on the other side there was no prison, but something interesting.
Because the impression I've got, obviously my impression is just from films, so I see it as like barbed wire in between, people with dogs. And watchtowers and machine guns on watchtowers.
And hundreds of meters with also minefields, obviously, and so on. And there was a very different impression, because from the west, if you looked at the wall from the west, it was all colorful, because they sprayed it and painted it.
Right.
But from the east, it was just a blank concrete wall and lots of barbed wire and guards and so kind of.
Yeah. What was let's take you back to education. What was your education like then? You obviously enjoyed yourself, but you'd have freedom to a certain extent.
Yes,
So what was school like?
To begin with, school was, couldn't compare it with anything else, so I felt kind of normal, and also there were good things. I had some really nice, really good teachers, but it became more difficult as it went on when I became a teenager and more aware of what was going on, and also more interested in politics and was going. And then I actually got into a bit of trouble at school.
How did you get into trouble?
Also because I was brought up a Christian,
right.
And my parents were members of the church, and I would go there, and also then later on to youth groups, and this was something which was addressed at school. So I had, because in East Germany the official ideology was atheism, and the church was seen as something from the past and something they wanted to get rid of. And I remember quite vividly, even early on in school, that there was a point when our teacher told us about religion, and that there are some strange people who still think there's a God out there. We know because Yuri Gagarin went up there and there was no one. He didn't meet anyone, so this is all a bit stupid.
Yes.
But there are still some kind of
weird people.
Weird people, and we've got one here in our classroom actually. Kai, can you stand up? And we all have a great laugh at Kai, because he's so, and I was standing there and I couldn't believe it. I was like a very young age, I didn't know what to say.
Yes.
But I had good friends in my class, and I was probably like a little bit popular even. So I knew that they would only do it because they were told to, and afterwards some said, I'm sorry, I had to laugh, but I didn't mean it, and so it wasn't.
So no
but it was a very. I remember this quite vividly, because it was and from then on, and then the thing was, it was in a way, we could say it was a dictatorship, because there was no freedom of speech, and that you would realize quite quickly at school, there were no discussions, or you couldn't question certain things.
Right.
And I was told off then later on quite a few times when
if you question something.
And then as a teenager, you do question things. You do, you want to challenge adults. And whenever I said something, And
do you remember an occasion where you did?
Yes, and I had then friends not only in the church but also and family and other friends who were quite who had different views, and we were talking about history. And like in history lessons, when I said something, and then I was really put down by the teachers that, if you say this again, then you're a state enemy, and this will have consequences, and we will relegate you from the school or something.
Right. Okay. So we called it expelled.
Or expelled.
You'd be expelled from the school if you carried on doing it. So what was? So were there other punishments in the school that would have taken place if you did anything wrong? I mean, nowadays they'd give them perhaps detentions or get them to, do some social work. But were you? Did they have a disciplinary code that you had to abide by?
I think in a way, interestingly enough, I think the educational system was actually quite progressive. I know that in East Germany, long before they did this in the West, we had co-education, so they would bring boys and girls together, and corporal punishment was banned straight away. It all goes back to there was some very progressive Russian pedagogues like Makarenko, and so their influence was then played a role, and so on one side it felt quite progressive maybe, and they also we had at school we had this a council, so the pupils were asked to form a council and have a say in what
we did
how to develop the school, but it was like goes back 30-40 years, and
that was incredibly progressive then.
It sounds like, but on the other hand, there were certain things you were not allowed to see. You couldn't make certain suggestions. It all had to be like they wanted it to be. They want, and which then was basically they would use you to do or to say what the ideology wanted you to do or to say, and you were not allowed to make any suggestions or to say anything else.
Were pupils encouraged to spy on other pupils? I mean,
yes, so basically. And when I turned out later on then to be someone with views, then actually I was cornered by my fellow pupils, and they by our class teacher probably told them, you have to talk to Kai and get him to
peer pressure then
change his views or so they tried to, but that didn't really work because I was
going to say, because by the time the wall collapsed, which is 89, you would be 23. So you've got quite a bit of growing up there, and you kept your religious faith. What was it like for the teachers? Were the pupils encouraged to say anything about the teachers too?
I had a good friend who was a young teacher, and it was really interesting because then I was able to understand the other side or get a view from the other side, because he then said there was a lot of pressure on teachers. The whole very organized, and they all had to keep records. Like for a very simple thing was we were early on. We were all asked, what do you want to do in life? So what profession do you want to take? And then people would say, I want to become a zoo director, or I want to become a explorer. And then the teachers were told, no, we need 5 soldiers, we need 5 builders, we need, because it was all about getting the statistics right, and they would then talk to you and say, explorer, this is a bit, and and your country doesn't need so many explorers, but we need a soldier. What about, do you want to become a soldier in the National Army, or you want to become, or maybe a builder or a teacher? So they try to talk you into something, and but there was a lot of pressure because then this friend who was a teacher and said, and he had to report to his headmaster, and he would, open the class book and say, in the back of the class book, there was this list, and he said, you have to do something there. We need more builders and more. Yeah. It was a kind of the system, and there was a lot of pressure on teachers, and they would get into serious trouble if. Right. And I know because when I later went even further, when I was at the age, so I was I don't know what the English word for it, but you had to report to a commission, like to the army, and they would look at you and ask you, or say, at the age of 16 or 17, you'll be drafted, and we want to know your physical state and maybe where we can send you.
Right. And with compulsory, does that mean everyone had to do compulsory military service?
Oh yes, yeah. There was
at 16.
18.
Okay, so
there was compulsory.
Yes, we would call it national service. And you'd have 2 years national service. Is that the same in East Germany? So you had to do. Yeah,
in East Germany it was 18 months.
Right.
In the army.
Right. Okay. You could you and you had to go in the army.
You had to. It was compulsory.
The Navy.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think was it at the age of 16, they would call you. You had to report, and then they would look at you and kind of decide where you would have to go. And this was a point, and because I still am, I am a Christian, and at this point, through our Christian group there, I decided, so it was like the early 1980s, there was when a critical point in Europe when I'm not quite sure now, but maybe the Americans.
Oh, it's Reagan, isn't it?
Yeah, they decided to base more nuclear weapons in the West, West Germany, and then the Soviets did the same in East Germany. So the SS-20 and cruise missile Pershing. Right. So there was a real tension, and and our not just in the church, but also at school, it was a big talk. But at school, they said very clearly, this is the Americans, this is the West. They are doing this. They're putting pressure on, and we just have to react. And we don't want any war, but they want it. And but outside school and in our church group, we of course looked at it from a bit of a different angle, and we said, this is both sides. This will go either nowhere, or we will have a war if this goes on. And so I decided. Then there was one. Basically, one possibility was you could say, like, as a Christian, I don't want to be trained on weapons.
Right.
I would you'd still go to the army. You would still be drafted, but then you could say, as a pioneer, I just I'll build roads, or I walk.
You were allowed to do that.
Yep, yeah, but it was you had to go for an interview, and which was not an easy one. They would really ask you for hours questions, and if this was really what you wanted and why, and you had to write it down and again and again. So I decided I would do this. I didn't want to be trained on any weapon. I was still at school, so basically the school knew about it, or I was quite open about it, and then became really difficult, because also the school was like not good for the school's reputation to have even one pupil saying I don't want to do this kind of thing. And on top of it, actually, they then in East Germany introduced paramilitary training for pupils. So we had at the school, not the army, but at the school we had compulsory lessons, 2 hours per week, where we trained to march and to shoot and so on. And then I refused. There I said,
you refused to do that too.
I'm not doing it because I don't want to do it in the army, and doesn't make sense to do it right now.
So what happened then?
Yeah, that got me into real trouble because first of all, the school didn't like it, and they were probably afraid because they would have to report it to the next level.
Right.
And so the headmaster would, it would be good for him and for his reputation and for the reputation of the school to have someone who says, I'm not doing this, I'm refusing. Right. And so they, first of all, they tried to persuade me, and or they, as I said, it was something new. They didn't know quite how to deal with it. Yeah. And so I had to report to the headmaster every week and sit there and explain myself over and over again, say, why am I? But I said, I'm a stupid Christian. I don't know better. I'm one of these stupid people who even believe there's someone up there.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And how did the head teacher react? Did he?
They put on pressure. Then my parents had to come with me, and they tried all sorts of things. In the end, they told me I would have to leave the school because this was part of our part of this school curriculum. This was proper lessons and nothing. It's like if I would have said, I don't want to do maths. I don't want to do sport because I don't like it. So
you left?
No. The whole process was like, this was I think it was the 11th year. And so first of all, they put me with the girls. So the boys had a different training from the girls would do first aid most of the time. Okay. So they also gave us, I think, a kind of uniform, and we had to gather and do some marching, but the rest of it was just first aid.
Yes.
And the boys had to do shooting and other things and kind of combat training. So they put me with the girls, and I had long hair, which made sense, maybe.
It was the 19th. Oh, were you allowed long hair?
Yeah, but it was also kind of also almost seen as rebellious and something. Yes, but not. It was not the end of it, but so I was kind of already. They had a bit of a.
If you can imagine, I was just trying to think. In Britain, it was probably long hair was the late 60s into the 70s. By 80s, I think our hair was getting shorter. So so you can imagine that in East Germany, the long hair is as it was in Britain was a sign of rebellion.
But
rebellion. This is what I am.
It was also a bit later. Actually, it was kind of. Postponed in East Germany. We were with everything came a bit later because of course we was until so and so basically the school year went by with me having to go to the headmaster every week and joining the girls, and then when it actually came to an end, then they also had to probably check with the authorities and work it out, and then in the end they said, so that's it now. You either give in and do it with the boys, join the boys there and do the training, or you have to leave the school. And then I talked to my parents and to our pastor, and in the end they said, there's nothing we can do for you. If you keep refusing, then probably this will happen. And then in the end, I decided, actually, I don't want to leave the school. I wanted to do my A-levels, so I said, okay, for the last round, I'll do it. But it felt kind of, I had made my point and didn't feel so bad to just do the last session. I joined them and had to take the Kalashnikov and shoot once.
Yes, I was thinking back again to when I've been looking at First World War, Second World War. They probably want even pioneers to learn to shoot a rifle because the question, if I was the head teacher, the question would be, what happens if American soldiers come over and though you might class yourself as non-combatant, it's either you kill them or they will kill you. You know, will you use your Kalashnikov?
Yeah.
You know, so that's why they do it.
That's the essential question. They didn't use this as an example, but they would ask me, you know, what if you go with your girlfriend and for a walk in the woods, and then someone comes and attacks you?
Yes.
Will you just stand there and let it happen, or will you defend yourself?
Yes.
And and this was like a typical question, and then you had to kind of talk your way out of it, or some people then said, you know, I'll never go into the woods. I don't have a girlfriend. I'll never have one. Or
it's like the American gun lobby now. Isn't it? The American gun lobby used the same sort of argument again. So what were the A-level exams you did? Were they was it we do like GCSEs and A-levels now? What were the German equivalent or East German equivalent to GCSE?
Yeah, it's basically the same. We had exams in the 10th year.
Right.
And then again in the 12th year.
Right.
So,
okay, which is the same as ours.
So therefore, I could have left the school in year 11, and I would still have had my basic exams, and could have. But I decided at the time. I said I would study theology. This is also for me one argument to say I don't want to become a priest, a pastor. So I don't need to be a soldier, or and which probably helped. And then they said, oh yeah, he's going to become we lost him anyway. He's going to become a pastor.
I'm now intrigued. You can do theology, so the universities would offer theology, isn't it? Where you'd think, because they were so anti-religion, they would have got rid of the theology degrees. I'm surprised that was still there.
Yeah, there was a time when they tried, I think the 1950s, maybe even the 1960s, they tried very much, and the ideology was, exactly, religion is something of the past. It belongs to capitalism, and we are now in a socialist society.
Yes.
And this has become...
Yes. Enlightened.
Yeah, exactly. And then they realized, I think the government, they realized that this is not going away.
No.
And then also I think when East Germany, the GDR, became a member of the United Nations, they had to provide certain things, or like signs of
guarantees and things. Yes.
Guarantees and freedom. So they just continued. So you were able to study theology at most of the universities.
If I go backwards again slightly, another thing that I pick up from watching films is that it wasn't just children spying on teachers. It was also, you'd have to be aware of the secret police, which is the Stasi.
Stasi.
The Stasi. Were you aware of the secret police?
Oh yes, yeah. It was always something you learn. I mean, in my family also, because we had relatives in the West, even England, and then I have to say, like, a few members of my family left East Germany illegally. They were allowed to visit. One was one of my father's siblings. The three siblings, they were all musicians. One was a musician and played in a big orchestra, and they did a trip to Sweden, and he left.
Didn't come back.
And no, didn't come back. He was,
What was there repercussions for the family?
Oh yes, yeah. It's like I remember my father as a doctor before because he was head of this clinic, and he so he was able to go to conferences in the West sometimes. But after his brother and then his sister, they both didn't come back from visits to the West. Then he wasn't allowed to go to any Western countries anymore, only to Eastern countries, to Bulgaria or for conferences. So there was a bit of a
because with Berlin, the other thing we were conscious of is that people were tunneling underneath the wall as well.
They both managed. They were allowed to leave, but then didn't come back, which had consequences also for the family. Then because it was seen as a criminal offense. Even to know about this, you were actually asked to report anything. If you had even if there was a suspicion, you knew your neighbor, family, relative, whatever, had plans, then you were supposed to report it to the police, so they would be able to stop.
When the wall collapsed, you'd be 23. Yeah. What do you remember of the collapse of the Berlin Wall? Were you frightened? How was it? Was it reported, or?
I remember it quite vividly because I had just started studying then. So what happened after school?
Oh, sorry, were you at Leipzig University, or?
No, I decided to join a seminary run by the church in the tradition of the confessing church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Right,
Under the Nazis, the church decided to set up its own places for theology students because they like in East Germany, also in the GDR, so you were able to study theology at university, but the state would kind of keep control of it. So there were certain things they would have a say in who would be a professor there, so they would pick people and people they would think they would be loyal to the state and so on. Therefore, the church continued to have these seminaries, independent, and the consequence was if you studied there, this wasn't acknowledged by the state. So you could work in the church, but you couldn't, as an academic, you couldn't work for the government or anything. They wouldn't, they would. There was no, they wouldn't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But I had just, and after school, I did. I worked at the theater, so I didn't want to study or didn't study straight away, and did a social year in a nursing home, and then I was drafted, and then I did what I intended for a year and a half. I was a pioneer, officially a pioneer. But what happened was they sent us to big factories in East Germany, chemical plants, and we had to work there. And the army would basically sell us to these factories, and we had to work.
Yeah. Because pioneers, if it was a battlefield, would be going out reconnoitring and looking for building tunnels,
building trenches and so on. Nothing. This
works in a factory.
We were sent to, which was really interesting because I got a really good insight of the state of the industries in East Germany, and it was like appalling. It was really all falling apart, and there was a big chemical plant near Leipzig, actually. Leuna, and I was sent there with hundreds of other, and we had to work there. And apparently they told us, or they didn't tell us, but we got to know that before they had prisoners to work there, and then it was there was something went out there, and this was illegal because the work was quite dangerous.
Yes.
So the government was told, or whoever, they couldn't send prisoners there anymore because this wasn't right to use prisoners as guinea pigs or whatever. Yeah, so they sent us as soldiers. We were, because we couldn't say no. It's like you would have just had to. But it was interesting because I got a real good. Therefore, I know, like at the end of the 1980s. East Germany, it wouldn't have lasted much longer. It was really going down, and
from what I can remember, because after the First World War, you get this thing called reparations, where the Germans were expected to pay reparations for the war. After the Second World War, you don't get that. But what the Russians did in the East Zone was to take away factory equipment and everything. So it stripped the factories. So. Did you have health and safety was involved with your? I mean, did you have protective clothing? Because if you're working with chemicals, that could be really nasty.
Memory is coming back now. There was one when a fellow soldier told me they had just been sent somewhere to repair something, and he said he took a jar and there was mercury was leaking out. Mercury, leaking out of a pipe, and he just caught it in this jar. And he says, it's like, this is the most poisonous stuff you can... And it was a bit, felt really like the apocalypse when the
Yes.
first morning when we were sent there, it was also in the winter and it was dark, and you had all these flames shooting up. And
Yes, I can imagine.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I obviously survived, and I met. It was interesting to meet really working class people there, and to listen to them, and they were interested. They wanted to know, why are you not in the army? Why are you not out? Your barracks. Why are you not doing training? Why are you here?
Were most of the pioneer people religious then, or did
quite a few, but there were people who had actually decided for themselves they wanted to leave the country. They wanted to, and look, this was became more and more people in the 1980s who said we don't want to live here anymore in East Germany. We want to go to the West, and then they had to apply for not just a visum, but basically to be released.
Right.
And then the state, one of the basically punishments was for men was they would look and say, you haven't been in the army. Before we let you go, you will serve 18 months, and we'll make it most uncomfortable for you, and you have to leave your family, and we'll have you. And then they said, but if I'm going to serve, I'm not going to pick up any weapon for this country, because I'm going to leave here. Anyway, this is not my country anymore. I want to go to the West. So we had quite a few, which then you can imagine it was quite a kind of interesting mixture of people, and it was a very interesting...
You could tell Germany was in East Germany was falling apart before '89 anyway. Then so then when the war came, I know from a historical point of view there was a worry that Russia might do something. So how did you feel when the war came down? Can you remember your reaction when you saw it was reported?
So I was in a place called Naumburg, which is famous for its big cathedral from the 12th century, and there was this seminary, and it was quite small, and we were very close. So where it actually happened, where people first crossed the border then on the 9th of November in 1989. But I had a fellow student who came from Berlin, and he had decided for one semester to come to Naumburg. He was studying in Berlin. And I remember that he got really restless, and he said, why did I come here? And now I'm sitting here and in the middle of nowhere, and this is all happening, and I could be in Berlin, I could be right there. So he was really interested, and I was more into what happened around there. And Naumburg's not far from Leipzig, so I used to go to Leipzig for weekends. I still had a room at my parents'. And to see friends, so I was there for the big demonstrations in 1989. I was actually, even if I was studying in Naumburg, I would then sometimes come back for the weekend and stay on until Monday, because Monday was the day when they had these demonstrations in Leipzig, and also when the biggest one happened on this 9th of October in 1989.
Because obviously from our impression from the West, we see the wall coming down in Berlin. We don't think of the rest of East Germany. So the rest of Leipzig had a huge demonstration.
Yeah, that's where it actually started. So Berlin was Berlin. There were so many soldiers there and police. Nothing much happened there because it was so much suppressed. The same in Leipzig. What happened in Leipzig was the build-up over almost a few years, and more people, and mainly people who had decided to leave East Germany, and they were looking for a way to express their feelings, and also looking for help, because they were really desperate to leave. And then the state would say, no, you have to serve 18 months, or we let you wait, we'll tell you when you'll be able to go. And then they lost their jobs, they lost their homes. Sometimes they were just sitting on their suitcase waiting, and the state would let them wait, say, no, we'll tell you. And then within 24 hours you will have to leave, but we let you know when it's time, and you can't do it on your own terms. So there were lots of quite desperate people, and they were looking for a space where they could express themselves, and this happened to be the church, because since the early 1980s, we had this peace prayer in the church when what I said before with the nuclear weapons on both sides. So the church continued, and for a long time there were only a few people gathering and saying, we will continue because this is important. And then suddenly people basically from a different background and with a bit of a different attitude joined, because they needed somewhere where they could express themselves. And then it also kind of shifted a bit from praying for peace. It was then praying for change, maybe, and then the churches became packed with people.
Yes, if you're praying, you have to pray to someone, don't you? And this is maybe what they then began to realize that.
It was really, also from a Christian point, it was really exciting and to see, how this kind of developed, and actually the church played such an important role for civil change and to give space to people and help people to express themselves, and because they were, like in East Germany, the churches were marginalized anyway, and there were not many. I was in my class when I had to stand up. Maybe there were a few others who were happy that they weren't picked out by the teacher, but I know most people, church was something.
Then you get, it was 93, I think, when you get unification.
1990.
1990 for
the third
so
of
very
October.
quickly then, really.
And
to see collapse was, from our point of view, was amazing, really, because you could have the soldiers firing at you. The Russians could have come in as they had done in Czechoslovakia in '68. How did you feel when to be united back with Germany?
Yeah, first of all, no one really. This all went very quickly. But I have to say, first of all, in 1989, no one actually thought this would happen so quickly. And anyway, would this happen, or was this what people wanted for Germany to be reunited? Because we all knew, we had these different systems for 40 years, and things were quite different. So people were just, to begin with, were just happy about the change and to get some freedom. And lots of people would say, we need to change things in our country now, in East Germany, in the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, make it a democratic country now. And West Germany, we look at it later, or this is not a question right now. We need change here. But then all went very quickly because of, one thing, I think the economical power of the West, it was just overwhelming, and then also situation with the Allies, and it was very fortunate to have Gorbachev there, who obviously didn't
you could see Russia was
intervene and said, which because it was interesting, like knowing that in East Germany 1 million Russian soldiers or Soviet soldiers were stationed in East Germany. So we had one, and Naumburg, where I studied, was actually the headquarter of a general, of one of the highest. There were two high generals in East Germany, and the south was all. The headquarter for the south was in Naumburg, so there were 30,000 troops, Soviet Union troops near and around Naumburg. You would see them on the streets everywhere. You would hear Russian. They were omnipresent. And so 1990 was the reunification, and the last Soviet soldier left East Germany in 1994. So it took 4 years to bring back 1 million troops with also these nuclear missiles and everything back to the Soviet Union. So there was it was actually a big thing to happen.
In other words, they wouldn't have to invade; they were already there.
It would have been. No, that's. And I think the East German government, like Honecker, he was counting on the Russians. He thought, when things get difficult, I'll just say, can you come again, like in 1953, and help me? But Gorbachev said, no, this time it's your problem. I'm not going to do anything, which was interesting because obviously Gorbachev did differently and later on than when it came to the Baltic states, wasn't it? He sent his troops there and said, no, you're not getting independence now, or Georgia.
Yeah.
But with East Germany, he was saw differently, or thought this is now the time. And then they had to, obviously, and Germany then had to, there was the 2+4 agreement.
Right.
The East and West Germany, and then the 4 allies, and
I see.
where they all, what we hear now again, was they obviously said, we won't expand NATO to the east.
Right.
And but they also sorted things like West Germany they agreed on building houses for Soviet soldiers in Russia, so they could bring back all these.
Right. Okay.
They are 1 million. They had to put them somewhere. I mean, not all the one, but at least the officers. They needed housing and so on. So Germany paid for it.
Okay. So you got the West Germans paying.
Yeah, the West Germans, of course.
Would then be paying for Russian houses, etc.
But it took 4 years, and I still studied. I stayed there in Naumburg for another couple of years, and I remember we had. Still, when we had our parties as students in the evening, sometimes there was a knock on the window,
right.
And they would loud, and some Russian soldiers would stand there and try to bargain and exchange. They had like their medals and bits of equipment and bits of from their uniforms to exchange for a drink or a bottle of wine.
Yes.
So we had in our student hall, we had very interesting decorations, some red stars and.
Tremendous. Because I mean, because again, the Russian soldiers are then in the position of the Germans in a way, because they've got nothing. You've now got the wealth of the West, whereas the Russians are under scrutiny from their secret police in the same way. But when did you come to this country? When did you stay in Germany for a bit, or?
Oh yes, I studied, so then at the beginning I was still in Naumburg, and then suddenly everything was possible after 1990, and I then decided to change and go to university, and actually spent half a year in Switzerland. Suddenly everything was possible, and then went to the West Germany to university there, and in the end ended up in Leipzig, and that's where I did my exams. And I remember my first trip to England very well, because this must have been in 1991 with 2 friends, and we cycled all the way from East Germany to England. And
okay. Which makes me look pathetic when I think I used to cycle up the lane to this school.
But it was I was much younger, and it was also because it was so exciting for us. You can just cycle, and you're not getting stopped.
Yes.
And then I actually also it was interesting because I had English lessons at school, so we learned some English at least, but I had. Far longer had Russian at school, but it's all gone now, because we used it quite a bit when there was the only possibility was to go east. So I've been to Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, and there. The interesting thing, what you could actually English or French wasn't very common, but Russian they all had to learn Russian. So in the end, we ended up. Speaking Russian or trying to with hands and feet, and so my English was almost non-existent when I first came. And
let me just thinking back to East Germany, it wasn't all bad because you had a nice childhood. What was good about East Germany?
Looking back, it's also as a child, of course, you just. You accept everything because this is where so you don't question many things. But when I come back to Leipzig now, when I go back to Leipzig, I realize, now Leipzig has developed. There are lots of new houses in places where there was nothing. Like you could actually, when I grew up, you could still see the scars from the Second World War. You could see that we had. The good thing was we had within 5 minutes. there were plenty of meadows around, even in the center of Leipzig, where we could play football. So when I would meet my friends, on this and this meadow. So there were, but this was basically where there used to be houses, and they did not rebuild them because
no money
for my family. And personally, I think that one of the main restrictions was you were not allowed to see your relatives in the West. You were not allowed to go there. And the advantage of Leipzig was there was this fair twice a year, Leipzig Fair. It goes back to the Middle Ages.
Yes, very.
And there's a book fair. And my mother later, she changed jobs. She wouldn't work in the hospital anymore, but she worked for a publisher, so she was really into books, and then also was had a stall there at this book fair for her publishers, and then you would meet people from all over the world, and sometimes make friends, and it was really interesting. It's kind of suddenly the world.
Yes.
There it was, for long. Otherwise, you had it all in your television. In terms of materialistic things, I was when I was young, I was really into. I had a racing bike, and I was really into cycling, and it was really difficult to get spare parts.
Yes.
And you had sometimes you had to queue. You knew, this is a certain day of the week when they have a delivery, so you would go there and just stand just in case they might get something, and this was a bit annoying. But on the other hand, maybe it was also you would value things a bit more, and it was actually quite exciting then to get something you were looking for a long time, or get a parcel from the West. Books were very important in East Germany, and because this was also a kind of freedom, you could at least, they wouldn't publish everything, and certain things definitely not, and certain things were not allowed. They wouldn't publish Solzhenitsyn, Archipelago, Gulag, definitely not. But then you might be able to get it from the West, sent from your relatives. But books in general were very important. Of course, there was no internet and nothing, but so people would read, and sometimes you would be able to exchange books, and they would go from hand to hand. You would get a copy that was really worn because so many people read it before, and it's quite And these days, you get whatever you want, and you can read and watch.
And it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. That was really good.